Welcome to the place where you'll hear from HR leaders, people experts, and wellbeing professionals. You'll learn about their personal and professional journeys, hear about the future of HR and wellbeing, and take away actionable insights and tips. This is the HR and Wellbeing Insider podcast. Welcome to today's episode of the HR and Wellbeing Insider podcast. Today I'm talking to Stuart Mace, who talks about the core pillars of a workplace wellbeing strategy and why it's important to listen to your people. Stuart has experience at places like Skanska, Vitality, and also is on the board at Let's Improve Workplace Wellbeing. I'm really excited to talk to Stuart today, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Hi, Stuart. Lovely to have you here on the HR and Wellbeing Insider podcast today.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Where in the world are you?
I live in Guildford in Surrey.
Nice. Okay, cool. Well, look, it's great to have you here. And I think to dive straight into your experience, why do you do what you do? And how did you first get into the world of workplace wellbeing?
Good question. Why do I do what I do? I do what I do as I feel that my background has been leading to this point, and what I do is intentional from an aspect of helping people make informed decisions about general aspects of their workplace health and well-being. It gives me satisfaction, and it's an opportunity to show to others or to help others and put them in point them in the right direction, I think. And you can do that in various different industries, but how I came to this is that actually I'm a health and fitness science graduate. That's what I studied when I was a boy, I guess, and worked in health and fitness for 7 or 8 years, managing 2 premium end health clubs, and left there. Lost my mojo with that a little bit, showing my age here, Paul, when the internet came in. And it was a ball and chain behind the desk, and got away really from managing people. It was more managing a business and a P&L, which I didn't mind doing, but it became too much about that. And I left to go traveling around the world with my now wife. And when we came back, 2 managers I'd worked with in the health and fitness clubs had started up a recruitment company down here in Guildford. I lived in London at the time. And yeah, I got in touch with them to ask them to help me find work back in the leisure industry or health and fitness industry. After a couple of weeks, one of the directors went on holiday. The other director asked me if I'd go and work for them for 2 weeks, and I ended up staying for 8 years. And we built a small startup from an agency point of view, recruiting in health and wellbeing and health and fitness and then leisure. And then I moved into internal recruitment. I managed a few teams in internal recruitment, which is more account-based recruiting. It was towards the end of that career, Paul, where I really thought I needed to do something which was different to what I was doing. Whilst in my health and fitness career and my health and my recruiting career, I helped people make informed decisions about how they feel, how they looked, and what they did. In recruiting at the sharp end, and where I subsequently ended up, you get to see the real ugly side of organizations. You get to see the power struggles amongst elite management or top management. You see the egos, the narcissism to a point, and how dispensable people are. And I started to question, actually, is it the people or is it the organization? Is it process? Is it work systems? And when hiring managers, stakeholders have come up to my desk or ping me a note and say, such and such isn't working out, can we look at, start the process to finding a replacement? I'd push back on that and say, why aren't they working out? What is it we've done for it not to be working out? Is this a capability thing or an attitude thing? And invariably, this came back to, actually, we're not looking after our people, we're just getting rid. And my job was to replace, and I was complicit in that. And whilst I probably didn't have the influencing skills from an internal talent acquisition point of view, that's where I started to look at how do I start to make a difference internally to organizations when we're looking at the emotional complexities that are involved in hiring and letting people go. And I didn't feel it was right. I felt we needed to do more. I felt I needed to do more from an organizational point of view to actually say, we've hired somebody for a reason. They've worked out for a certain period of time. What is it that we haven't done? How much pressure are we putting them under? Is it our style of management, et cetera, et cetera? And when it came to the pandemic and I was let go by my last recruitment job as an internal recruiter, I really took stock as to what it is I wanted to do. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at this coincided with the detrimental decrease in my wife's mental health. And she eventually ended up in hospital, where there was one suicide attempt in hospital. when the pandemic came about and lockdown came about. So I really had to consider what it is I wanted to be from a good husband point of view.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know what to do and how to deal with that, Paul. I had to really take a good, long, hard look at myself as to, for the first time in our sort of relationship. Now we've been together for quite a while. She's 16, I was 17. We met at college, and this is now happening in our late 40s. I couldn't fix this. And I had to trust others, or actually, in fact, trust her to fix it. So I took a mental health first aid course just to sort of to see what it was about and how would that help me personally with when my wife does have panic attacks or is moving it down into a depressive cycle, etc. Doesn't want to get out of bed, has panic attacks, etc., etc. And that started getting me thinking about actually the world of sort of, shall we say, psychological health and well-being and occupational health and well-being. My wife did go back to work after 7 weeks, would you believe, of being off. And through no fault of their own, her organisation didn't know what to do. Didn't know how to deal with it. Had a mental health first aider, had occupational health, and she went back and lasted 7 months before she was even worse. So the work didn't help. And again, that wasn't any fault of their own. And throughout that period, I was still looking for work, potentially around recruiting or doing something else. And that's when I sort of felt my skills will suit working within organizations to help them with the health and well-being of their workforce. I could see what her organization were trying to do, but where they failed. And funny enough, I'd seen that in the tail end of my recruitment career, whereas we were failing our staff, and it wasn't staff, it was long-winded answer, but that's what has brought me to this point today. Sat a few NEBOSH courses to get me up and running. I then found myself on a master's course up at Nottingham University for occupational health and wellbeing, or more recent term, more recent title is Workplace Health and Wellbeing. So I say it's now called Workplace Health and Wellbeing. It used to be called Occupational Health Psychology, should I say? Graduated from that last year. I've had a few contracts now with Vitality and Skanska, where I've been part of their internal health and wellbeing team. Subsequently looking at my next venture, as my contract with Skanska finished just last month.
Wow. I mean,
sorry about that. It was a long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing experience there. And actually, my next question was going to be, was there a defining moment that sort of helped you personally, that really solidified your passion to helping organizations think differently about workplace and health and wellbeing? And I dare say that personal experience you've just talked about there with your wife was part of that.
Yeah, that kind of switched me on to, I've got to look at things differently. It had been ruminating, and I'd always wanted to study psychology, funnily enough, when I came out of doing my HND in workplace in health and fitness science. We didn't have a degree at the time. That shows how old I am. But I never got around to it because I got up in the claws of premier end health clubs and a massive career trajectory. But I think it was when I got accepted to do the masters that I thought, well, I'm all in. It's 3 years study, which you do part time, and tens of thousands of pounds to do. You got to do 15 hours a week study and work at the same time, whilst I wasn't working at that time, but I did find work subsequently. It was at that point I thought, this now and I hadn't got a degree, and it's something I wanted to do. So I guess that was the tipping point. Part of me thinks I was always going to do this. I was always going to come to this point. And I feel very, very comfortable in this space, and the skills and the experience and what I've seen of organizations through a recruitment lens really does lend it well to this space. And I think that those skills and what you learn in other roles can really help in this area. But I also think, I hate to say it, Paul, but I do also see some of these skills lacking in people who are working within our space, which is a frustration.
Yeah.
Because this isn't something you just pick up and learn from watching a few podcasts or texts or doing a 2-day or 3-month course. It's something that comes with time and experience. The one big area I think we lack in our industry, which I think is probably undersold and underrated, is the ability to be able to influence and the ability to be able to communicate in different styles and different ways with various different stakeholders up and down, a managerial ladder within an organization. The way I would speak to somebody when I was working at Skanska, for example, the way I'd speak to someone in health and safety advisor versus the CFO or the CEO when we used to have our quarterly meeting, totally different. And anything in between. They have different agendas, and we need to understand what those agendas are. We need to match a mirror. We need to pull on what the business objectives are and meet them where they're at with regards to what my agenda is going to be to ensure that we can show value and we're actually doing what we're supposed to be doing from a health and wellbeing point of view.
Really interesting. And I think that I've seen that myself. I mean, you see it on LinkedIn, right? So people who sort of started out in HR, in an HR admin role or HR management role, and HR is changing. It's now the people function, and it's head of people and wellbeing, or it's head of wellbeing, benefits and reward. And these are big, wide ranging roles. What's the answer? I mean, is it getting people to do a degree, to do more learning? Is it to break this down in terms of a proper, or not a proper, but a specific specialism? Yes. Is that the way forward?
I think it is. I think you don't have, when you look at any other department within an organization, you have somebody who's accountable for that department. Look at sales and marketing, or sales and marketing, HR and acquisition, health and safety, legal, social media, internal. You will have people, IT. You will have people who are leading those departments, and you have specialists in those departments, right? And invariably, big companies will have health and wellbeing or occupational health. Size organizations, probably a bolt-on. Small, or SMEs, probably nothing at all. They're just doing what they have to do to get by, and predominantly it's probably the founder or the CEO who's making those decisions. So when we look at what workplace health and wellbeing is, it underpins absolutely everything within an organization. The argument I used to make to one of my VP of sales when I was working in recruitment, and it still holds water today, is our number one star performer. What happens if they go sick? What happens if we push them too hard? What happens if we put too much load on them that they've got to make up 50% of the company's revenue, leaving the other 5, 6, 7 salespeople to only make? So we've got to be looking at understanding what we're, pressure and what we're putting people under. So it's really a case of looking at being specialists within our role, understanding what needs to come with that, the competency, but also the education has to be there. There needs to be systems, frameworks, theory, and understanding coming to this role, so we can advise, competently, and allow organisations, or help support organisations make informed decisions. If it's a bolt-on, it will never be somebody's account. Somebody will never be responsible or accountable for it. If you say, it's for the organisation, everyone's accountable for for their own health and well-being, or the health and well-being of others. I get that, but you almost do need a single point of failure, like you do with any other department within an organisation. And therefore, coming back to that point, that health and well-being underpins pretty much everything within an organisation. If we don't look after how we treat our staff from a health and well-being point of view, we won't have a workforce. We don't have our staff coming into work as productive as they can be, or as working as optimally as they can be. So I can't understand why an organisation wouldn't have a specialist within that, or at least a specialist within that role, or at least somebody who has some charge of that part of work.
And really interesting point. Is it down to return on investment? Because when we look at workplace health and wellbeing and people, you've got finance teams saying, well, do we need a wellbeing manager? Do we need a workplace health and wellbeing advocate? Do we need to spend more money on more benefits, on more wellbeing apps and solutions? Is it as simple as a return on investment for the business?
I don't think it can be, because you'll never win. I don't think you'll ever work, because it's very subjective, first and foremost. What does that look like? And I know there are various different numbers out there, and Deloitte have done a report, although you can question how they've done that when you start to look at, the data gathering and how they analyze that data. And of course, there's an element there of it's in their best interest to demonstrate that there's a return on investment and all that sort of stuff. And we got to question the evidence and the source and who's putting that narrative out there. But I always think you're going to fail when it comes on to return on investment, on how you measure it, because it's very, very subjective. What I do think And if we do need to go down that sort of pathway to demonstrate why we do this, and I do have a feeling that, maybe if health and wellbeing does have to report into somebody, why not finance? It's something I've thrown out there a few times, because if the FD knows what you're doing and what difference you'll make to the organisation, they will do it. I ask in every organisation I've been in, and for every CFO or finance director I get to talk to, I ask them one question, which is, how much does absenteeism cost your organisation? 100% of the people I've asked do not know. They cannot give me a figure because it's not in the P&L, because it's under salaries. And therefore, it's very difficult for them to give a straight answer. And even if they did, I'd certainly question how they're managing tracking it. And actually, there's probably additional costs for that. But that's another thing. Coming back to sort of the return on investment piece, the way I sort of placed it when I was certainly at Skanska, relevant posts on LinkedIn, is you cannot afford not to look at health and wellbeing within your organisation, because you're legally bound to do certain things. You're legally bound to, protect and almost create no harm, or at least do no harm. The return on investment is staying out of court. The return on investment is not having to pay somebody, dozens, tens of thousands of pounds to settle out of court. The cost it would, for your legal team and potentially your HR team and any, sort of PR or any sort of reputational damage control. That's the return on investment, because we have to do something when we identify risks and hazards in the organisation. It's there in law, and therefore that's the part where I would sort of gain traction from senior stakeholders, or senior leadership team or executive management team, was around, if we don't do it, we're liable, as opposed to if we put in £1, we get 5 back. It's not about that. It's about, if we don't do it, we're going to be having to settle out of court, or we're going to end up going to court and to tribunal, and that's going to cost a hell of a lot more. And how do you measure that? Well, by how much we don't get sued, or that type
exactly,
of thought process.
Yeah, and it's not just about the pounds and pence. It's that emotional return on investment. Absolutely. And that emotional side, absolutely, I think is important.
Yeah.
And I think when we look at workplace health and wellbeing, what would you say are the core pillars of a workplace wellbeing strategy?
So I would look at the work of the professor over in Australia, Anil Lamatain et al., the work they did in 2014, which was the integrated intervention approach for workplace mental health. So very basic, but well researched. 3 areas which you can manipulate slightly for your organisation. He basically looks at the integrated approach, which is protect, do no harm. Okay, so it's prevent. And I think that's critical. First and foremost, we've got to stop what is causing people angst, issues, making their work difficult within the workspace. It's then looking at promoting the positive, which is, for me, promoting the positive of well-being, as well as promoting the positive of work. And then the third part is managing illness, or the way I look, or manage sickness, or the way I look at it is support. And this is what I see within organisations, is that we throw a lot at there is support and the individual, and they're more tertiary interventions. So that's the approach I feel works very, very well. When we start looking at protect and do no harm, and prevent, for me, that's primary interventions, looking at root cause. We can then look at how we promote the positive and work and wellbeing. And to me, that again is more around the secondary, or the secondary interventions. But that would be things around the awareness days and around the training, around the upskilling. Are you self-aware of actually what's happening to you within an organisation, or what's happening within, with the, communications between you and others? And then obviously, as I said, that sort of support and manage sickness is that tertiary piece, where we seem to have a lot of noise in this area at the moment, but not so much upstream looking at root cause. So I don't think strategies, I don't think plans and what have to be too complicated. I think there is a lot of distraction and a lot of people trying to sell you things and apps and all this sort of stuff, and giving you numbers and data and all this aspect that kind of move you in a route that is not actually going to help. And therefore, I do think it needs to be, it is simple in terms of what the model should be, I feel. It's not that easy getting to it. I get that, because obviously we're dealing with people, and people are irrational, and people have their own confirmation bias and are complex and come with their own agenda, which I would, as I said, which I saw a lot in recruitment. But for me, if you just look at those three areas, ideally the optimal is a good blend of all three. That's why I feel you're probably finding you're going to have workplaces where A, people want to be there, but B, they're going to be able to perform their best work.
Yeah, love that. And I will link the research in the show notes. So I think that'll be really helpful for people listening in today. And in terms of businesses, so like you said there, it doesn't have to be complicated. And I think, from my own experience, I think a lot of businesses do overcomplicate benefits and workplace wellbeing. But what are the common pitfalls for businesses? And what have you seen businesses where they actually get it really wrong?
I'll be generous here. I don't think the majority of organisations, let's put it that way, intend to get it wrong. And I do think for some, this is still new. This has really blown up since the pandemic. Let's be honest. Although there has been, lots of good work that's done before that. And as I say, the bigger enterprise organisations would have had chief medical officers or chief wellbeing officers in place and what have you. And so this isn't necessarily new, but it has, as I say, kind of blowing up. But I do think organisations look to do things intentionally. They want to do it right. Maybe they don't know how to, and it's new, and obviously we've got to fumble around in the dark to get it right. To eliminate what doesn't work or process of attrition. But in terms of why organisations get it wrong, it's because I think there's an element of fear. They don't know what they don't know, but also I think they feel they have to do something, and therefore they maybe look to do too much and go all in and actually start tackling things which are it's not their business. It's down to the individual has issues outside of work. It's their issue outside of work. It's mental health first aid will be something along those lines, I think, and we can talk about that in a bit more detail if you wish. But I also think that there's an element of organisations saying we don't want to touch it, and this is nothing to do with us, and potentially anything in between. But I do feel that if you've identified and had a definition of what that organisation think wellbeing is in their organisation, and had that objective, and then are very clear and concise about how they get there and what they're responsible for and accountable for, I think there is a clear pathway. And I'd go as far as say just follow the law. Now, there are three to four pieces of legislation. If you follow those, you're going to be fine. In fact, you're probably going to be doing a lot better than most organisations. So, as I say, that's why I think some organisations get it wrong. They look at the support, the benefits and the perks as that's our responsibility, and therefore, because we provide this, our people are going to be okay. When actually, you've got to start looking at environments you're putting people in. You've got to start looking at the work you're giving them. You've got to start looking at the processes and systems. That's what's causing harm. That's what's causing burnout, if that's what it is, or psychological damage. They're the things we need to be looking at. Work is a determinant of your health and well-being. It's not, we're going to make you sick, therefore our support package is great. Go and get yourself better. And then when you're better, we'll help you get yourself better, but we're going to put you back into the environment that made you sick. And I think that's where we're finding that's that sort of perpetuating cycle of, well, we keep throwing benefits at it, but we're not looking at core issues or root issues as to how we're making.
I think that's a really key point. I mean, I remember a client from a few years ago that I was trying to implement a wellbeing solution, and the irony was that they couldn't implement it there and then because they were too busy. It was year end, it was an accountancy practice, and everyone was stressed and working extra hours. And actually, that's what you've sort of just said there, is that we're giving people support and benefits and perks, but we're still making them feel that way in the first place. And then we give them private medical insurance, go and get yourself better quicker. But then come back to work, and that root cause of the culture, the stress, the anxiety, the workload, all of that doesn't get fixed. And that's sort of what you've touched on there. So actually, sort of when we think about health and wellbeing, health and safety, from a people and HR perspective, does it help or hinder HR?
I would say both. That's sitting on the fence, isn't it? And it's a bit of a cop-out. I use that word culture. I think that it depends a lot on that organisation's viewpoint and culture. And I think that's going to come back to, it can hinder because, as I said, organisations can think, I'm not sure what to do here, or we're going to just look at this area, but we don't want to look in that corner over there because we know what we're going to find. And therefore, we're just going to bury our heads in the sand on that. Although then you have organisations that are well aware of what's going on and will look to tackle it head on. Sometimes they do it right, sometimes they don't. But I do think there's that element of how an individual is, how an organisation is trying to make their workforce feel, and how are they helping in terms of that, and is there evidence to demonstrate that what they're looking to do is going to solve the issues that they have within their organisations. So it's a tough question to answer, because you could jump onto, I mean, we're maybe talking into an echo chamber here, but you jump onto LinkedIn, for example, and potentially, with regards to, organisations that you've worked with and worked for, what is it you're trying to put into what is it you're trying to sell into an organisation? Does it actually fit what they're looking for? Or have you created that demand by telling them these are the issues? They've bought product, but actually they haven't solved the issues because they didn't know what the issues were in the first place. So I think there's an element there of a lot of people within HR are getting sold a lot of things. Or there's let me put it this way. People in HR have a lot of options now, and it's very difficult to cut through the noise to understand what's actually going to be right for my organisation or what's not. And therefore, there's that pressure, coming back to what you said around return on investment. If we invest £50,000 in this piece of software and we get licenses for the next 3 years, how do we know that's going to work? We've been sold and we've been told it's going to work, but where's the evidence to back that up? And what happens if it doesn't work in 3 years' time? Are we then going to lose our budget, or are we too scared to make another decision, or are we going to stick with this route even though it's not the right route, but we're going to double down on it till we make it right? And there's you haven't got that sort of implementation process where you can agile. I think but then you look at HR and those companies that do care and will put in reasonable adjustments and do wrap around their workforce and do whatever it takes to get that individual back to work if they're off sick, or actually keep them in work by doing what it is that they have to do.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I've really answered the question, because it's not a black and white thinking type answer. I don't think.
No.
There's 150 shades of grey within that.
Yeah.
So, it's a tough one.
Interesting. Yeah. That it was a tough question, I'll give you that. But yeah, really good to understand your thought process, I think, behind it. And from your experience then, if we think about leadership teams in businesses, what are the roadblocks that you've seen that leadership teams face when it comes to implementing a workplace wellbeing strategy? And those couple of things, sort of the top two, how do they get around those? How do they get over those roadblocks to actually go ahead and do it?
And again, that's the $64,000 question. And I know we are told that leadership have to get involved, or we need the buy-in from leadership, et cetera, et cetera. And I've ruminated about that for a while as to, well, why do we? And I think we do because there's role modeling and there's permission that you can do this. So in my last role, as I mentioned with ScanSky, I was the chair of the Mental Health and Wellbeing Network. And we had several conversations around what that means, what it does, and mental health first aiders. And we got to a point where we offered the 2-day mental health first aid internally, but just because you did the course didn't make you a mental health first aider for our organisation. You had to go through a selection process. And part of that selection process was that we would get line manager commitment that the person who wants to be a mental health first aider gets time in their working week to be a mental health first aider. When push comes to shove, when they're coming to an end of a project, and when the stress levels are going up, and whether or not we have done enough front end to try and mitigate those, it says that there's likelihood to be more of a need for mental health first aiders. But our mental health first aiders have less time because they're part of that project and a part of that pressure cooker that's building up to a handover time. Now, therefore, if our mental health first aiders, and this is just like an example, don't have the time, are saying in our forums and our chats, I don't have the time. It's kind of like, well, your managers tell me you can have the time. So we then escalate that to their manager, up to their MD, and it's that whole piece around, we're serious about this. We want to give people the time to do it as their working week, part of their working week, but also to role model that they're doing it as well. Stop firing off emails out of hours. Stop being available on holiday. Stop utilizing the Christmas break as a time to rest and recover because work has been so manic. Whilst work's manic is when you rest and recover. Daily, not save it all up and store it up. the behaviour style, and what you said. But the thing being here is that there's that element of influencing where how does health and wellbeing become that number one priority over P&L, over profit and loss, and over money. And it comes back to that story I sort of said, if our star players go down, how's that going to affect top line and bottom line revenue? Therefore, we've got to be ahead of the game. So, we've got to ensure that we're looking after not just our star performers, but everyone within the organisation, because pretty much everyone, in their own right is a star performer. But, it's looking at how I think leaders look at their own actions. Are they self-aware? And the one thing that I find has been a quite pertinent question when I have spoken to the leaders and CEOs or whatever it might be, or MDs, is what do they want their legacy to be? Because when you ask them, what do you want people to remember you by? You've got 5-year window, let's say, in this position with this in this organisation. What is it you want to be remembered by? What is it you want your legacy to be? It won't be I got my bonus every quarter, or we hit our number every month. Whilst that's important to them, it will be I'd like to have made a difference, or I'd like people to know that they were looked after, or I inspired somebody, or they followed me. So therefore, it's their own self-awareness as to, well, how do you think your people are seeing you now? Yeah. What is it you talk about? Are you coming to town hall meetings or business addresses and the first thing you talk about are numbers? Because that's how they're going to see. So what is it you want to leave behind? That's what you need to address, because the numbers will look after themselves. If you, if you ensure that you're addressing what how you're going to get the best out of your employees. And I do think there needs to be that element of, we can have people and profit. There isn't one over the other. You can have them both, but let's start integrating that into what the narrative and the rhetoric is around about, look, if you're not in your, if you can't perform at your best, that's fine. We still want you to be here, as long as it's not creating you to be more, to be more unproductive, because you're most important to us, not what you produce. You're not a productivity unit. Yes,
I really like that.
We do need you to produce. You produce for the right reasons, because it's good for you, and work is a determinant of your health and wellbeing. Not because I'm going to make bonus, or I'm not going to get sacked because I've missed my quarter number.
Yeah. And I think that is, it's you want to be known for, a lot of people I speak to, they want to be known for and remembered for how they make people feel. Yeah. How do you make people feel? Not the fact that, yes, I've earned my commission and bonus this month. And I think that leads nicely on to sort of final question for you now. But what can businesses do right now? A couple of things businesses can do right now to start getting wellbeing right in their organisation.
I think a couple of things. First and foremost, they need to understand who their workforce are, and they need to meet them where they're at, because there's no point in trying to change behaviour when they don't understand how their workforce think or where they're at. So look at the demographics, look at the behaviours and what have you. Look at the style of communicating, and where are we in terms of maturity of thought, maturity of health and wellbeing, and look at society and how does society affect what's happening within work. So I think there needs to be that element of understanding who our workforce are. Are they office-based, hybrid, all those sort of things. Clearly, you're going to look at what we offer. But then there's looking at what the needs of the business, what is happening within their organisation that is creating the desire that an organisation wants to look at their health and wellbeing. Now, is it absenteeism's high? Is it that, we've got lots of dysfunctional presenteeism? Is it we can't attract or retain? Is it we're just not hitting our number because we just don't have capability? Is it we've brought in too much technology and we're just overloaded? So there's all we need to unpick that. But coming back to that sort of model I mentioned earlier around the integrated intervention approach, there's all this wellbeing initiatives that are great and are good, but you've got to stop you've got to stop causing harm physically and psychologically. And therefore, you've got to start looking at risk assessments. You've got to start looking at where the hazards are. How do we get our people to actually enjoy work, not I've got an email at 6:30. I feel I have to, reply to this and that sort of stuff. So again, I think there'd be an element for organisations to look at what is the problem you're trying to solve and come with theory, come with evidence with regards to how you're going to build that strategy with moving forward as to what the objective is, and try and do it simply. Let's not get too embroiled in the distractions and what have you. And an example of this, Paul, is, when I was at Skanska, and a line manager would ping me or call me up and say, look, here's a scenario. The question they say, well, someone's, I don't know, they've come to me and they've demonstrated that, they're going to go off sick if they continue to doing what they're going to do. The question back is, well, what do you think is the next best thing to do? Well, process, policy, and procedure say X, Y, and Z. I say, put that aside, because that's just a piece of paper that we're all supposed to follow, but do we really follow? What's the next best thing for that individual that you think would be good for their health and well-being, for them to either take as little time off work as possible or stay in work? What's the next best thing that's going to help them? And if they didn't know, funny enough, why don't you go and ask? Just ask them, what do they need from us as an employer, that if they're already off sick, how do we support them and help them get back into work as quickly as possible? Is it work that's making them sick? What do we need to do? And if it's not, what do we need to do that when you come back to work, that you would stay in work? Or if you're feeling that you might need to go off work, or you're getting injury psychologically or physically, what do we have to stop for you to actually stay in work? Look at reasonable adjustments. Look at being inclusive. Just because you didn't do it for Joe Bloggs over here doesn't mean to say you can't do it for, Jane Doe over here. It's different circumstances. What's the next best thing that you can do for that person's health and well-being, that they are thankful, grateful, and you've been empathetic towards them? And to me, it's that simple. Now, if the answer is not practically reasonable or reasonably practical, then that's a bit different. Do you know what I mean? It's say, well, we need 15 new members of staff because my workload is too big. You can't just go and, So there's that element of actually consulting with your workforce, finding out who and where they're at and what they're about, and then work with that, because that's your workforce. They have the answers to your issues. They have the answers to your problems.
Love it. I think meeting people where they're at and simply having a conversation and asking the question, it doesn't always have to be around policy, procedure, and it doesn't have to be complex. So love that. I mean, you've just delivered a lot of value in this last half an hour or so, a lot of value. So anybody can obviously reach out to you. I'll share your LinkedIn profile in the show notes as well, but really appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing all of your knowledge and expertise with us so far.
Okay, thanks for having me. And if you ever need a part 2, then let me know.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stuart.
Cheers, Bob.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the HR and Wellbeing Insider podcast. If you enjoyed this content, please make sure to follow us over on LinkedIn and sign up to our monthly newsletter, which will include hints, tips, and news on all things people and wellbeing. You'll also hear from some of our guests. Thanks again, and see you in the next episode.